Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kara, and today's video is going to be my October housing market update. I believe that every statistic I'm going to be sharing today actually has a chart or an image to go along with it, so I'm going to sit kind of to the side of the screen a little bit to allow for space to put those charts up here. As always, I'm going to break this video up into a few different sections, those being price, inventory, mortgages, local news, and other news. So let's start out with price on a national level. I know that home prices are a really big topic right now because people across the country have been seeing price decreases, and the big question is kind of what's going on and what's going to happen as we head into next year. Well, if you take a look at this chart, you can see that prices are beginning to decline a little bit, but an annualized drop in prices is highly unlikely. So the solid line represents the change in median sale price over time, whereas the dotted line shows the trend. We broke away from this trend when mortgage rates started to decrease, but it really just seems like we're maybe going to fall a little bit back towards this trend, but not exactly a collapse. Something interesting to note is that Fannie Mae is now predicting price declines of around 1.3% by Q2 of 2023. You'll probably recall that in some previous housing market update videos this year, I shared a very similar chart that also showed Fannie Mae's predictions for next year, and they were previously predicting that price appreciation would get down into the single digits sometime next year. As you can see with this updated prediction, it is possible that we might see some slight price declines next year. Interest rate increases are really the big driving factor here. I do think it's important to point out, though, that 1% is a very small number, and this could easily be 1% in the other direction. It's also important to note that this is a national statistic, and this doesn't necessarily mean that prices will decline in Asheville. It's also possible that if we start to see a little bit of a drop in interest rates, that demand might start to pick up, and then price appreciation might pick up again as well. This next chart shows you that Fannie Mae is predicting the number of home sales will decline right around 18% in 2022 and an additional 21% in 2023. This is much higher than their last predictions of 2.4% and 3.5% respectively. Let's move on to price on a local level. The Q3 statistics are now out, and the median sale price in Buncombe County is $450,000, which is 12.5% higher than we saw a year ago. The average sale price, on the other hand, is pushing $570,000, which is a 12.9% increase year over year. For the general Asheville region, which is comprised of multiple counties, the median sale price is $395,000. This is 13.3% higher than a year ago, while the average sale price is just under $480,000, which is a 12.5% increase from last year. So as you can see with these Asheville statistics, whether you're looking at Buncombe County, where Asheville's located, or the general Asheville region, we are still seeing price increases compared to last year. So in other words, homes this year are more expensive than they were last year. Let's move on to inventory on a national level. This chart only shows the first 7 months of the year, but it does show that inventory increased from January into July. Interestingly, the number of homes for sale in July exactly matched the number for sale last July. However, inventory is still way below levels that we saw in 2018, 2019, and 2020. This clearly shows that there is not a massive oversupply of homes on the market. This chart shows that the number of home sales is lower than what we saw last year, but higher than what we saw in 2019 or 2020. And when adjusted for seasonality, year-to-date 2022 sales are actually higher than every year except for 2021. I've shown charts similar to this one in the past, but I did want to show this again because it is really important to note, especially in this quickly changing market. I know a lot of people are very quick to say that we are in a buyer's market now and, it's not a seller's market at all anymore, but that's actually not the case. If you take a look at this chart, you can see that we are still very much in a seller's market, despite the number of listings having risen and sales declining. In fact, we're not even in a balanced market, let alone a buyer's market. I know this might sound a little bit odd, but it really is the case. The seller's market that we saw start in 2020 and go into 2021 and even early 2022 was an extremely unusual seller's market. It was one of the strongest seller's markets that we have ever seen in the history of real estate. And so to come out of that, it's going to take a long time for us to actually get back into a neutral market or a buyer's market. It will happen. Real estate is cyclical, but it's just not going to happen overnight. This next image highlights something that I think is really important to note if you've been wondering what's happening with foreclosure rates. Well, foreclosure rates are rising slightly. However, it's highly unlikely that they're going to rise enough to cause any sort of material change to the market. The reason is because in Q2 of 2022, 48% of homeowners who have mortgages across the country were sitting on over 50% equity in their properties. I've mentioned this in videos in the past, but ultimately, if someone is headed down the path of getting their property foreclosed on, they could pretty easily sell that property, get their money out, and pay off that mortgage without actually being foreclosed on. Let's move on to inventory on a local level. The number of homes for sale in Buncombe County in Q3 was 706. This is 15.2% lower than we saw in Q2 of last year. When we take a look at the Asheville region, we can see that the number of homes for sale in Q3 was just under 2,300 homes. This is 10% lower than we saw in Q3 of 2021. So overall for the Asheville region, inventory hasn't really been increasing. And I think it's going to be a long time before we see any sort of significant increases in inventory going forward. One of the biggest reasons for this is because anyone that purchased a home in the past couple years likely locked in a really good interest rate, maybe in the 2s or 3s, and now with interest rates being around 7%, a lot of those people don't really want to sell their property and get stuck with a higher interest rate. They want to hold on to that low rate for as long as they can. Of course, we will always have people moving for work or to be closer to family and other reasons like that, but interest rates will definitely have a damper on inventory. All right, let's move on to some mortgage news. Demand for home loans hit the lowest amount that we have seen since 1997. This is due largely to interest rates increasing to right around 7%, which is higher than we've seen them in the past 20 years. Interest rates are certainly on the rise, but they are in fact not too high when we look at them from a historic standpoint. If we look back over the past few decades, we can see that the average interest rate is 7.81%, which is in fact higher than where they are right now. And believe it or not, they were over 16% back in the 80s. I've been reading a lot of different predictions for what interest rates might do next year, and of course, as I've mentioned in past videos, projections are just that. They're just projections and predictions, and we can't really say with any amount of certainty that they're really going to come true. I don't think anyone predicted that interest rates would reach 6% or 7% this year. So take this with a grain of salt. Mortgage rates are predicted to ease to right around 6.2% by the end of next year. While this may or may not be true, pretty much every prediction I've been reading is suggesting that interest rates will decline to some extent next year. Let's move on to local news. I only have one thing for this category, and it's kind of a fun one. If you've driven around West Asheville lately, particularly around Carrier Park, you may have noticed some kind of funky A-frames that have popped up along that road. They are actually part of something called the Wrong Way River Lodge and Cabins. They were recently constructed and are currently being used as short-term rentals. The price for these is in the 200s per night, and of course varies depending on day of the week, holidays, seasons, etc. On the property, there are the individual cabins, but then in the lodge, there's also a restaurant, little shop, meeting space, outdoor space, etc. I know they've been a little bit controversial because not everyone loves new developments, and personally, I'm typically on the fence or usually negative towards new developments myself because I am more of an environmentalist. However, I do think that these are a pretty nice addition to West Asheville. But I'm curious to know your thoughts as well, so leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think. Alright, let's end out this video with some other news. Lumber futures are now in the 400s. This is less expensive than what we saw in February 2020. You may recall that lumber costs spiked in 2021, then dropped off, and then spiked again earlier this year, and now they're starting to decline again. This will of course have a delayed effect on construction costs, as there is still quite a large backlog. Despite lumber costs dropping, materials that are considered an input to residential construction, like cement, brick, sheetrock, etc., remain 38% more expensive than they were in February 2020. So we're not really going to see any huge drop in construction costs, though I do think they'll start to drop a little bit going forward as demand has continued to lessen. That being said, I think it's important to note that construction costs in general always go up. If we look at a longer term time frame, we'll see that this is the case. And it's the same for home prices too. If we look at a home that sold back in 2000, that home is going to be worth way more today than it was back then. So I know a lot of buyers and sellers even get really hung up on what's happening, month to month, week to week, and even just year to year. But if we really take a step back and take a look at the longer term time frame, if you want to buy a home and live in it for, let's say, 10 years or more, there's a really good likelihood that you are going to sell that property and make a good bit of equity. Of course, that is if you keep up with maintenance and maybe do some upgrades along the way. Well, I think that I've talked your ear off enough today. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this one. If there was a particular statistic that you found really interesting, or even something that you'd love for me to film in the future. I always love to hear from you guys. Also, don't forget to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well, and share this video with your family and friends. Also, if you're new to my channel and you're not already aware, I do have a free homebuyer guide that I created that breaks down the home buying process step by step and really makes it easier, especially for first-time homebuyers, but also if you just haven't purchased a property in a while. And if you're a potential seller out there, I'm always more than happy to provide a free comparative market analysis on your property so that you can see what it might sell for in today's market. Well, that's it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. As always, my contact info will be at the end of this video and also in the description box below. Reach out to me anytime with questions, recommendations, and if you would just like to meet up in person sometime. Alright guys, well, I'll see you very soon in the next one.